The smell of antiseptic filled the air, but it couldn't hide the sharp scent of fear. In the corner of the emergency room, a woman clutched her swollen belly, beads of sweat sliding down her forehead as she whispered prayers under her breath. Her contractions had been coming faster now, 2 minutes apart, then one, and still no one came. Nurses walked past her like she was invisible. Clipboards shuffled, phones rang, monitors beeped. Yet the world seemed indifferent to her pain. "Someone, please," she tried to say, but her voice cracked under the weight of exhaustion. The receptionist barely looked up. "You'll have to wait, ma'am. We're very busy tonight." Busy. The word echoed in her head as she bent over in agony, the pain slicing through her body. Her name was Aisha Coleman, 32 years old, 8 months pregnant, and barely conscious. She'd been rushed here by her husband, Marcus, after hours of complications. He was now pacing the hallway, helpless, as every passing second felt like a countdown to disaster. Aisha had always been strong, a teacher, a mentor, a believer in fairness and humanity. But in that cold, sterile waiting room, she wasn't seen as any of those things. She was just another black woman, one whose pain didn't seem urgent enough to matter. Minutes later, when the unthinkable happened, Marcus Coleman's world collapsed. And within hours, that same hospital, the one that ignored his wife's cries, would face the most devastating reckoning in its history. Because Marcus wasn't just any man. He was a man with power, influence, and an unbreakable will to make the world remember his wife's name. This is the story of how a moment of prejudice inside one hospital room led to a storm that shook an entire institution to its core. A story about love, loss, and the price of ignoring a woman's pain. Aisha Coleman had always believed in empathy. She was the kind of teacher who noticed when her students looked sad, who stayed late after class to talk, who brought extra snacks for those who came to school hungry. Her heart was wide enough for everyone, even those who didn't treat her with kindness. She grew up in Atlanta, raised by her grandmother, a nurse who'd worked in underfunded clinics for decades. From her, Aisha learned one lesson that stuck forever. We might not control how people treat us, but we control how we rise. When she met Marcus, she wasn't looking for love. He was a quiet man, focused and serious, a successful architect running his own firm. He loved Aisha's warmth, her laughter, her ability to find hope even when life got rough. They built a life together that was simple, grounded, and full of dreams. After years of trying, Aisha finally got pregnant. It was their miracle child, a little girl they had already named Maya. The pregnancy had been mostly healthy until the last trimester, when she began to feel strange pains and swelling. Her doctor had dismissed it as normal discomfort, but Aisha knew something wasn't right. Still, she trusted the system. She'd grown up believing hospitals were places of help, not harm. She followed every instruction, attended every appointment, and waited patiently. Then, one late evening, her contractions began, sudden, violent, and accompanied by sharp abdominal pain. Marcus rushed her to St. Matthew's Medical Center, the nearest hospital. It was one of the largest in the state, clean, modern, and known for its reputation. Or so people thought. When they arrived, Aisha was already in visible distress. Marcus pleaded with the front desk to get a doctor, but the nurse there, a young woman with a cold stare, barely looked up from her screen. "We're at capacity," she said. "You'll have to wait for triage." Marcus tried to explain that his wife was high risk, that her blood pressure had spiked recently, but no one listened. They handed him a clipboard with forms instead. As minutes turned into an hour, Aisha's pain worsened. Her legs trembled, her breathing became erratic. Yet other patients, mostly white, were being called in one after another. Marcus noticed. He counted. 5 people who arrived after them were seen before Aisha. When he confronted the staff, the nurse gave a rehearsed smile. "Sir, emergencies are assessed by severity, not arrival time." But Marcus knew what was happening. The same quiet discrimination that haunted hospitals across America, the one that said black women exaggerated their pain, that their bodies were stronger, that they could wait. He wanted to believe it wasn't about race. He wanted to believe someone would finally help. But as the hours dragged on, Aisha's cries turned to whispers and hope began to fade. It was nearly 11 p.m. when Aisha finally collapsed on the waiting room floor. Her contractions had become unbearable, her vision blurry. Only then did chaos erupt. Nurses rushed forward, wheeling her away as Marcus ran alongside, his heart hammering. Inside the labor room, the attending doctor, Dr. Karen Willis, barely looked at her chart. "She should have come earlier," she muttered. The words pierced Marcus's heart. Aisha had come as soon as she could. As Marcus watched helpless, he noticed how the staff moved. Slow, casual, careless. There was no urgency, no empathy. He heard whispers between nurses, subtle scoffs, dismissive tones. One even said, "She's overreacting. Happens all the time." But this wasn't ordinary labor. Aisha's blood pressure skyrocketed. Her pulse dropped. She screamed Marcus's name before losing consciousness. The monitors beeped wildly, red lights flashing. Marcus shouted for help, but Dr. Willis simply ordered another nurse to prepare for surgery. Even then, she moved at a glacial pace. Minutes felt like hours. The hallway filled with the sound of footsteps, alarms, panic. Then came the silence, the kind that swallows entire worlds. Aisha's heart stopped at 11:47 p.m. They performed an emergency C-section, managing to save baby Maya. But Aisha never woke up again. Marcus's mind broke. He stood frozen as doctors gave scripted condolences, their eyes avoiding his. Someone muttered about complications and risk factors. No one admitted the truth. For 2 days, Marcus stayed at the hospital, watching his newborn daughter sleep beside a photograph of her mother. Reporters came and went. Friends offered prayers. But something inside him refused to rest. He knew what happened wasn't just medical failure. It was racial neglect. And Marcus had both the power and the platform to expose it. Marcus wasn't only an architect. He was a CEO of a multi-million-dollar firm that had just finished designing St. Matthew's new wing. He had contracts, leverage, and media contacts. Within hours, he called his legal team. What followed was a storm no one at the hospital saw coming. The next morning, headlines exploded across the city. Prominent black woman dies after hospital neglect. Husband claims racism played a role. Marcus held a press conference outside St. Matthew's. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm fury spoke louder than any scream. "My wife didn't die from complications," he said. "She died from being ignored." Thousands watched live. Social media erupted with outrage. Former patients came forward, black women mostly, sharing eerily similar experiences at the same hospital. Complaints buried, records lost, dismissals justified. By afternoon, protesters lined the streets. The hospital scrambled to control the narrative, releasing statements about deep regret and ongoing investigations. But Marcus had already begun his own. He leaked internal emails showing how cost-cutting measures had reduced staff for minority patients' wards. He exposed training memos where bias was ignored. And then came the final blow. Marcus publicly terminated his firm's $200 million construction contract with St. Matthew's. He revealed that his company's designs, funds, and partners would all withdraw support. In an instant, the hospital's expansion project, the pride of the city, was dead. But Marcus wasn't doing this for revenge. He wanted justice. He wanted accountability. He demanded Dr. Willis's license reviewed, an independent audit of all patient deaths, and federal investigation into racial bias in care. Within days, the state health department opened a probe. Nurses began to speak anonymously. Records revealed that Aisha had been labeled non-compliant in her chart, a coded term often used to justify neglect. The truth was undeniable now. Dr. Willis resigned under pressure. The hospital's board was replaced. The CEO issued a public apology to Marcus and the Coleman family. But none of it could bring Aisha back. Marcus stood in the nursery that night, holding baby Maya close, whispering promises that her mother's death wouldn't be in vain. Months later, the Coleman Foundation for Black Maternal Health was born, funded entirely by Marcus and dedicated to protecting mothers like Aisha. It offered legal aid, emergency care, and scholarships for black medical students committed to change. The story of Aisha Coleman became a symbol. Universities taught it. Lawmakers cited it. And across the country, hospitals began implementing mandatory racial bias training, stricter oversight, and anonymous reporting systems. Marcus continued to speak publicly, not as a grieving husband, but as a man on a mission. My wife believed in compassion, he'd say. If even one woman is heard because of her story, then her voice still lives. 2 years later, baby Maya toddled through their home, clutching a photo of her mother. Marcus watched her and smiled, a bittersweet smile that carried pain and pride. He knew the world was far from healed, but because of Aisha, it was one step closer. In the end, Aisha's story wasn't just about loss. It was about transformation, a reminder that silence kills, but courage can rebuild,